This is a really large Torah portion. It's actually two portions at once. And usually one parsha is read on this Shabbos and the following Shabbos because it's just because of the length of it. As we discussed earlier in commentaries, we see the Torah itself, the five books of Moses, represents a body, or represents the human form. Genesis would be the head of the Torah. Exodus would be the arms, outstretched arms of redemption. Leviticus would be the heart, Lev. Numbers, the legs, which represents the journey through the wilderness to reach the land. And of course, Deuteronomy, the mouth, which is trumpeting forth the Shema. Now, coming to the end of the book of Numbers, there are two parshiot shows us the children of Israel at the end of their journeying in the wilderness. They're assembled in the plains of Moab, facing Jericho, poised to enter the land. And it was there that Moses delivered this final discourse, which make up the book of Deuteronomy. And the various messianic themes and allusions in this week's double parsha make them appropriate for reading the central Shabbos for the 3-week period of mourning for the loss of the temple that is coming up. And we're not going to get into the details right now, but we can talk about that later on. But the whole idea is really interesting because it opens up with the idea of a vow. But first, let's talk about Matos. The uniqueness of the prophecy of Moses is seen in the opening words of this parsha. It says in Numbers, the 20th chapter, verse 2, and Moses spoke to the heads of the tribes of the children of Israel. And this is the word that God had commanded, like a direct command from God. There are various levels of prophecy, which may come through like a clear glass or through a dim glass. The latter is the case in countless verses in the prophetic literature, where the prophet would say, Ko, so said Hashem, or indicating that the words of prophecy were like. This is in essence what the master of the universe is saying. The actual truth, yet they are merely similar or invoking something that the creator would have said. However, Rashi points out in Numbers, the 20th chapter, verse 2, a uniqueness amongst all the prophets who was Moshe. It's used the expression, Zeh hadavar. This is the word. This is the word, the actual word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Moses revealed the very inner essence of God like no other prophecy. He didn't say this is a similitude or an essence of, but he said these are the words. And the words and commandments are important. This is a very significant text. Now, the importance of the theme of Matos is the care in which we must use words and language because they're very powerful. The idea that what we speak cannot obscure the truth. Numbers, the 30th chapter, verse 3 says, when a man wants to make a vow to Hashem or swear an oath, placing a prohibition upon himself, he must not profane his word. That means he cannot profane or make common his word, or it was useless words. I was just speaking it. I didn't really mean it. It says he must do according to all that comes forth from his mouth. Now, we've had lengthy discussions on vows, whether to make a vow. Should you make a vow? Are we prohibited from making a vow? And of course, we learn, yes, you can make a vow to something in service of the temple, something restriction or a fence or a hedge that you put around a Torah prohibition that you put extra up on yourself. And those are all good, but we generally encourage people to not make it as a vow, but to make it rather as a personal commitment without declaring a vow to Hashem. Why? Because we this idea that comes from the text is we've got to seriously guard the words that we speak and not let our words be common. Rabbi Avner, just last Monday, did an outstanding job. And if it's not posted yet on YouTube, but when it gets posted, it's really important to listen to. He's talking about the idea of blasphemy and what are the causes of blasphemy and the idea of making the name of Hashem common or overusing it. And he briefly talked about how a person can overuse the proper name of Hashem, obviously, or just speaking the proper name of Hashem, that is the real Yud Che Vav Che, overuse of it or using it at inappropriate times is like blasphemy. And then there's the other part that says, well, I didn't use the sacred name, but I used Adonai, but I'm throwing the word Adonai around as if it's sort of a common word. In essence, what Rabbi Avner was speaking of is not only should we revere the very name of God or his attributes in reverence, but we also should guard our language, period, not to cause our language to become base. Now, we live in an age with streaming services, volumes of words that come to us from billboards and papers and magazines and TV and radio, internet, social media. And we almost have become completely desensitized to words, their meanings and importance. For example, for those of us who are a little bit older, there was a time that if you watched television, there are certain words you would never hear. You would absolutely never hear on television. Now, these words are commonly spoken. They're almost adjectives, words that were sort of perversion at some level are now spoken like an adjective. And especially if you're on social media, you can see it all the time. It desensitizes. It causes us to not appreciate the deep meaning of a word. We take for granted, for example, that politicians make promises. They say that we can solve all of these things, and their intentions we think are true, but we come out at the end, they're elected, we find out they never intended to do any of the things they said. So we've almost become a society that expects that. We become a society that says, well, I know this is what you said, but it's all right because it's acceptable in society for people to not follow through with what they truly mean. There is an idea that we've talked about over and over that we can't change the world, but we can change ourselves. One rabbi, and I wish I knew his name, I just saw it here recently, and I actually went to look it up to see if I can find it. He's very emphatic. Quit trying to change the world. Quit trying to change everybody. Change yourself. Make the difference within yourself. Now, look, I can't go and protest at CBS, NBC, Facebook, TikTok, and tell them they need to quit allowing people to use horrible language, debasing language. We're now even in a society where they have perverted the very terms of genders. A man can be a woman, or a woman can be a man can have a baby, a man can menstruate, a woman can be a man. It's like they have confused the terms at such a level that, to me, this is my opinion, it seems evil. It absolutely seems evil that we're in a society that has accepted that. In any other society, and I would even say that any other society that is current in the postmodern era and in other places of the world would listen to that stuff as absolute mental verbiage for once to say it's all right for a 5-year-old boy to say he's a girl, or a 5-year-old girl saying he's a boy. It's like the science and the realities of truth are absent. As a matter of fact, it seems that if we allow this sort of, and I think it's a minority, it's not the majority of the world. If we allow this minority to continue on insisting that everyone accept their pronouns and their verbiage as being reality when it's not based at all in any level of reality, then we are slowly emerging ourselves into a very dark culture. Now, I propose something that comes out of Rabbi Avraham ben Yaakov's book on the Universal Torah. He says, as a medicine against the desensitization of society, the Torah asks us to think hard about the words we bring forth from our mouth, and particularly the personal commitments that we make. And we speak ad nauseum about lashon hara and evil speech. And obviously that's terrible. We don't want to speak evil speech. But also we want our yays to be yays and nays to be nays. We want our words to be true. We want to declare everything that is true and nothing false. And that's why we're combating in such a vigorous way a whole society that's wanting to blur the lines of truth. It means that and we hear this. There was an interview by a guy by the name of Matt Walsh, and he's asking a person about, what if I said that I'm a woman? He goes, well, she says, well, I know if that's what you say, then that's what you are. And he goes, but it would be impossible because I don't have the parts of a woman. And she says, well, that's what you believe. Therefore, I should respect what you believe is true. It's insanity, right? So what's the elixir? What is how do we solve this? As people of righteousness in the world, and I would even call the rest of the world that may not be Noahides, they're Christians, they're Buddhists, they're whatever, Muslim, that all those people begin to be people that love truth more than anything in the world. Now, we realize that some people can be misguided in their truth by accident. But my goodness, we all can strive to know the truth and to know wisdom. And all of us have experienced this place in our life in which we began to search for understanding and true wisdom, and we found it in the Torah. And the more we begin to live it out, the more the Torah becomes faithful to us to give us more wisdom. Now, one might take a vow, as we said, to dedicate something to the temple or to charity or to erect a personal boundary. We've said that already. But it's important to understand who was the progenitor of the vow. And Rabbi Avner is going to have a lot to say about this today. It's Yaakov. Yaakov was like the father of the vow. He went to Mount Moriah, and his dream of the ladder, all this took place. The angel, in the morning, he set up a stone, a prototype of the altar in the temple, and vowed that if God would protect him and provide his needs, he would take this and make this the house of Hashem and tithe and provide his needs. If God would do this, he would tithe all that he receives to Hashem. Now, obviously, David Amelech swore and vowed that he would not rest until he found a place for the dwelling of Hashem. Now, because of these two very serious oaths or vows to God, the Torah codes advise us not to take actual oaths or vows unless we're thoroughly conversant in the intricacies of the Torah law. And that's why this whole idea, the Talmudic tractate that talks about Nedarim or Nazir, and this whole idea of how this is bound up with careful analysis of the meanings and implications of different kinds of phraseology. So what are we saying? This whole text can be summed up with one thing: guard your mouth, guard your intentions, make them pure, and just do what you know is right. You don't need to make a vow to do what is correct and right. As I said, nothing wrong with it, but just do it. You don't need to make a big declaration or a vow to do that. Now, Steve last night talked about the war in Midian, and I'm not going to belabor that. So what I want to do is open up the floor for further discussion.